Hi there,
Okay.
and
Yep.
welcome to Around the Table Yarns. This is our very first Project Monday class on Tunisian crochet. I'm really excited about this. So we're doing the Muna Cardi by Toni
Mhm.
Lipsey of TL Yarn Crafts. And you can find the pattern on Ravelry. And you can also find it from her website, which is tlyarncrafts.com. Um, it's a really nice pattern. I've worked through the whole thing. Um, and usually I find something I want to switch up a little, and I really haven't at all. So it's a really, really nice pattern. So we're going to take 3 sessions to make this cardigan. And I just want to break down and just tell you how we're going to break this down, okay, over the sessions. I think it is a fair amount of Tunisian crochet to do, but we're breaking it down into nice bite-sized pieces. So today, the first class, we're going to cover the pattern. I'm going to go through the pattern with you. We're going to do a gauge swatch in Tunisian simple stitch. Once we get our gauge swatch, I'm going to talk to you about choosing your size. There's nice sizing on this pattern, which is great. Switch that there. We're going to, if you've never done Tunisian crochet, I'm going to demonstrate how to do the Tunisian simple stitch and the last Tunisian stitch of a row of the forward pass of a row. And I'm going to teach you the honeycomb pattern, which is the edging across the bottom of your cardigan. It's also the edging around the collar, and it's the edging around the cuffs of the sleeve. All right, so those are the things we're going to cover today. Our next session will be September 30th, and then our last session will be October 28th. So once we get through today, I'll tell you going forward how we're going to work it. I had a nice group in the class this morning, and they felt like this was a reasonable pace to keep up with. And if we find, like by the end of the second session, that it's like maybe we're going to need another session, we'll add another session. It's not a big deal. Things can be changed around. So that'll be good. All right. So this cardigan, the Muna Cardi, again, right here, is done, which I really love the construction. It's done mostly in one piece, okay? So I've got the piece that I've started here. Figure out where I am, which way it's going. It starts with the back, okay? So here's my back section, and we started down here at the bottom. Hi, people joining us. I am just starting. We're going to go over the pattern. You haven't missed a thing. The honeycomb pattern is down there at the bottom, and I'll explain the reason for that in a few minutes. And then you work up the back in Tunisian simple stitch, and then I'm going to kind of flip it across my back. When it's the length you want, then you start working, and you work down the right front panel. So there's no seam there. You just work down the right front panel. And then we'll pick up these pieces over here for the left front panel. The sleeves are made separately and attached. The pockets are made separately and attached. And then we pick up all the way around for the collar that goes up the front, around the neck, and down. Okay. So, but it's all basically in one stitch, the Tunisian simple stitch, except for the edging, okay, which is just a few rows. If you're like me, you're going to find that Tunisian is, I find it kind of mindless and very relaxing. Something about putting all those stitches on and taking all those stitches off that I find very soothing, okay? It will be a nice TV project. There's particularly on the body part, because there's no increasing or decreasing unless you adjust the pattern a little, which I'll talk about. There's some increasing you have to do on the sleeve, but not on the main body. So the construction is a fairly straight boxy style. I am not a boxy person, so when I did my gauge, and I'll show you, I decided to adjust it just a little. Easy enough to do. All right, so let's look at the pattern together. This is a paid pattern. So I'm going to, I don't want to share, I'm not going to share too much on camera because that's Toni's property and I need to make sure everybody has bought it. But I'm going to talk about the things in the pattern. So page 1 is your cover. Page 2, it's got your project supplies. This cardigan is done in, it's written for a DK weight. We had somebody today who was working with a sport weight yarn. We were able to get gauge and it looked great. Somebody was working with more of a worsted weight. They were able to get gauge. It worked great. People were working with wools, acrylics, cottons. I'm using a cotton silk acrylic blend, which is working up great, okay? So don't let the fabric or the type of yarn you use, don't let yourself be too limited. Give yourself a chance to try some things out and to get a gauge. Total yardage. This does take a lot of yardage, particularly for a shorter cardigan. It's not particularly long. You could make it longer. We know that crochet takes approximately 30% more yarn than if you were to make something very similar in a knitted project. I do think the Tunisian crochet takes even more than that. So it is a yarn eater. You could use a variety of yarns and stripe it to use up stash and things like that. So feel free to think out the box. And if you're not sure, please reach out to us and let us help you work through your yarn choice. If you're not local or you can't come in, we'll do that with you. She's got the other things you need. She did it for a DK and she's using a 6.5 millimeter Tunisian crochet hook with a 24-inch cord and a 40-inch cord. Most of your work is going to be done on a 24-inch cord. What you need that longer cord for is when we pick up all the stitches to go around the neck, you're going to need a longer cord, okay? So if you don't have one yet, you can still get started. If you don't have any cords yet, all you have is a crochet hook. Like I'm going to do my swatch without a cord attached because sometimes the cord, if you don't have all those stitches going, just kind of flops around, is in the way. Just practice on just your hook without a cord attached, particularly for your gauge swatch. You also will need scissors, tapestry needle, tape measure, and a couple of locking stitch markers, okay? Now, dimension sizes. She goes from small to 3XL, very generous sizing. From a bust circumference from 34 to 54. If you need to make any, it's not a cardigan that's going to button, so it's not supposed to come all the way closed at the front. It's not designed that way. So think of it as it's going to hang and leave a little bit open here. It's not designed with a ton of ease, between 0 to 2 inches of positive ease. So pick your size. When I talked about sizing, because it's just kind of straight up and down, my bust is not the widest part that I need to accommodate. My widest part is a little further down. So when I did my measurements, I actually started, because it's bottom up, I cast on a 2XL size because I wanted it to not be tight across my hips. So I started with a 2XL size and I worked out my gauge first. I knew I was getting gauge on my hook and needle. And then as I got closer to where I didn't need a 2XL size anymore, I did some decreasing and then continued on. So mine has a little bit more of an A-line shape to the back. Let's see if you can kind of see that. So it has a little bit of a slope to it, which I will mimic on my front pieces. And so as I work across the front panel here, oops, and come down, I'll be matching it up, and I have it marked where I did my my decreases. I'll increase so that it matches out this way. Okay, so know that you can do that. if you can't just go by the bust size, if you want to make it cropped, then probably the bust size is going to be the widest part, but it may not be. So don't let that keep you from trying this or keep you from getting a sweater that fits. If you have any trouble, please come in or call us and we're happy to work through with you. When we do our gauge swatch, if you get a fabric that you love that isn't exactly on gauge, we can help you do the math to make a size work for you, okay? So we can do that too. The gauge on this is 4 inches equals 15 stitches and 13 rows in Tunisian simple stitch. So once we work through the gauge swatch, I'll show you how to count your stitches and how to count your rows, because that might not be something you're familiar with in Tunisian crochet. She also gives you your standard abbreviations. She's an excellent pattern writer. She really includes everything that a good pattern should include. Things you need to know. You need to know how to chain, increase, which is listed in special stitches, the last Tunisian stitch, which I'll explain in a minute, a return pass, right side, skip, slip stitch, stitches, Tunisian purl stitch, and Tunisian simple stitch. Okay. So then on page 3, she explains those special stitches, how to do an increase. She explains what the last Tunisian stitch is, which I'll show you how to do, and what return pass means. I'll show you that in our gauge swatch as well. And then she gives you the directions for the honeycomb stitch pattern. She gives it to you in 2 ways, over an even number of stitches and over an odd number of stitches. I haven't gotten to my sleeves yet, but I'm guessing the sleeves are going to have an odd number of stitches because all of the cast-ons for the body are in even numbers, I believe. So she gives it to you both ways. So if you work out your chain and you get your first row going and you thought you had 20 and now you have 21, you can follow it. 1 stitch is not going to kill you on this. Easy enough to accommodate. You can still work through the pattern and have it look nice. Okay. And then she gives you the directions for working the back, the front right panel. Then we go to page 4, the front left panel. Then we talk about the collar, the sleeves, and then at that point, she breaks it down by size. So whether you're making you'll cross out or ignore the sizes that you're not doing, and you'll follow the directions for the size that you are making for the sleeves. And then the last bit, it also is true for the pockets. There are different sizes for the pockets as well. All right. Then she talks about how to assemble it and finish it off, which we're going to do in our last session. So a very well-written, thorough, really everything you need is in this pattern. She does give you a video link in the pattern, how to do the vertical bar increase. I would highly recommend Toni's website, tlyarncrafts.com, for any of her videos. If you type in Tunisian crochet, you're going to find a load of resources. It's always my first place to go. If you have her Tunisian crochet book, there's lots of helpful stuff in there as well. All of these stitches are explained. So lots of good resources. And again, we're a resource anytime you need. All right, so that's the pattern. I'm going to do a little gauge swatch. Feel free to do this along with and ask questions if you need, or you can just watch and go back and do this at your own pace. All right. One thing you're going to find, I have a couple of gauge swatches here, is that Tunisian simple stitch rolls. If any of you are knitters as well as crocheters, you will know that knitting stitches, if you knit one side and purl the other, it's always going to roll, and it's going to roll for the exact same reason. The tension on the front side of the fabric is different than the tension on the back side of the fabric. So unless they're even or evenly distributed, you're going to get this rolling thing. So that's why when, like the beginning of a hat, you have ribbing, which alternates knits and purl stitches, which evens out the tension. So you have the knit on one side and then the knit on the other. It alternates so that the tension gets even on both sides, and then it doesn't roll. That's what the honeycomb pattern does in this. That's why it's at the edging, it keeps it from rolling. If you'll notice, put my sample again. The bottom of my cardigan is not rolling. I have not blocked it. Turn it sideways. My sides are rolling, and where I finished up here at the top is rolling, but where I have that honeycomb pattern at the bottom, it's a mix of Tunisian simple stitch and Tunisian purl stitch, which balances out the tension and allows it to lay flat. So don't omit that part if you're kind of doing your own thing. You need that to help it keep, unless you don't mind that it rolls. I mean, there are some styles that have it rolling. All right, let's switch over here and let's do a little gauge swatch. I don't know why the light's so yellow in here today, but it's a little yellow. Okay, I think that's the best we're gonna do. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, it's upside down. This is an example of Tunisian simple stitch. And the fabric that it creates has a series of these vertical bars that kind of go from the bottom of a row to the top of a row. And that's what we're going to be working with in the simple stitches, these vertical bars. All right, so let me show you how to get them. This is where I had cast on with my chain, and I've worked through my rows, and I completed a row, and you'll see it looks kind of loose and unfinished there. That's because you really need the next row of picking up these bars to fill that in. So there is a way to, when you are completing, in this case, we're going to be doing the honeycomb pattern, which finishes it off, but of doing a final row to finish that off so that you don't have a top row that looks different from all the other rows. Okay. All right, so I'm using, the yarn I'm using for mine is from, it's pronounced Skeepjes, but you know, I'm not Dutch, so I pronounce it Sheepjes. It's their Secret Garden. It's a silk blend, cotton silk, acrylic blend, and it comes in many, many colors. This happens to be one that is mostly just tonal. It's this blue with a little bit of charcoal gray and white flecks. It also comes in some striping ones with these really subtle stripes, which is really beautiful. If you've ever worked with Noro Silk Garden, it has a similar feel without all the scratchy stuff that sometimes shows up in Silk Garden, the fibers. So it's a really, really lovely yarn. It can really go as a DK or a worsted because of the ply on it. It is very loosely single plied there. So it does bloom nicely, which allows you to get a little bit heavier gauge if you need to. I ended up getting gauge on, I got gauge on a J hook. So, which is just how I crochet. I did a couple of swatches. So I ended up getting gauge on a 6mm hook as opposed to a 5.5 that was recommended. I tried a couple and that's what worked for me. I'm going to, you'll find that as you're working with your Tunisian hook with your cord attached, your cord would have come with a stopper to put on so that your stitches don't slide off. As you're working, you're going to find that that stopper makes an awful sound depending on where you're sitting. Sometimes gets caught on things. I know some people take it off depending on how many stitches you've got. If you're not too worried, you can take it off. But you can also put, if you have a rubber band or something, you can wrap around the end, or one of those, a piece of foam that you can put on the end. Then when it hits stuff, it doesn't make a noise and get kind of annoying. just a little helpful tip. I'm gonna work because I don't have my key to loosen this and I've got it so nice and tight. These are the Lantern Moon Tunisian hook set that I gifted myself, and they are wonderful. I really love them. I also love, we carry the Dreams from Knitter's Pride. We carry theirs as well. And any Knitter's Pride hooks or needles that you have, their cords will work, as well as like that. Their cords will work on the Knitter's Pride hooks or needles. So I'm going to use this because for my gauge swatch, I don't need the cord and I don't want it bouncing all over the place. All right. Cut my yarn. Start it. All right. So I'm going to chain. I know in many of our crochet classes, we talk about using a foundation chain. That's not something you can do in Tunisian crochet. Put this in a good place here. So for my swatch, I'm going to chain, let's do 20. 1, 2. The hook that you're using that is recommended for Tunisian is always going to be larger than you think you need. The Tunisian hook is always going to be, if your yarn is recommending a 4 millimeter, you're almost always going to be using maybe a 6 or something like that. You must use a bigger hook because you need these openings to be larger so that you can fill them with the Tunisian stitches. Let me see how many I have. So if you normally would do a DK yarn on a 4 millimeter, you won't be doing that in Tunisian. All right, let me count my loops here. You know what? Since I'm gonna be working back and forth across this, I'm just gonna do 11 here. For your swatch, I recommend doing do 21 stitches so that you're gonna skip the second. You're gonna skip this one. I'm sorry, you're gonna skip this one, so do 20. In this case, the loop that's on your hook does count as a stitch. I think that works out. 1, yeah. So I'm going to do 10. Now, Toni will tell you when you go in on after your chain to go into the bump on the back of the chain. And that actually does help it lay nice and flat. It's not the easiest to see, but I'm going to try it. All right. So you're going to go into I'm going to skip the first chain away from my hook. So I'm skipping this one. I'm going into the second one. I'm going underneath the bump, pulling up a loop, and I'm stopping right there. It's not like finishing a crochet stitch. I'm not going to yarn over and pull through. I'm adding loops to my hook. So there's one. Well, that's actually the second because this loop on the hook down here does count as a stitch. Right? So that's 3. Again, I'm working into the bump on the back of the chain. If you want to go into the chain as you normally do, it's totally fine. Or because it's so loose, it's kind of hard to see. I promise it gets easier. 6. Seven. 8. My best work, but we're on there. Okay. But you would have 20. I've got 10, so I can work across the row a little faster here. double check, I would say for the first few rows here, we're going to double check our stitch count to make sure we're not adding or losing it. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I'm hoping to have 10 every time. Okay, so this is the first part of a row. It takes 2 steps to complete a Tunisian crochet row. Putting the stitches on and taking the stitches off. Then a row is completed. Pull out some yarn here. All right, now we're ready for what's called the return pass. The return pass is taking now these loops off. Every return pass is going to start with a chain 1. So you yarn over, pull through 1 loop right there, okay? Now this is how we're going to take off the rest of the loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. 2 loops. 2 loops. All the way to the end. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Over 2 loops. It's very easy to accidentally pull through 3 loops, so be careful. 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. I'm down to only 1 loop. I got nothing left to go into. So I've completed 1 row of Tunisian simple stitch. Doesn't look like much yet. But what we have created here, if I zoom in, is we have made our first row of these vertical bars. Okay, so let me move my clip right here. So here's this loop, which does count as a stitch. Its vertical bar is right here. We're not going to be using that one because this loop is coming out of it. It's already completed. Here's the next one right here. That's number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then there's something called the last stitch, which I will show you. It's the very end, and I'll show you when you get there how to pick that up. Okay, so I've gone underneath these bars because that's exactly where your hook's going to go to start row 2. When you begin row 2 of the Tunisian simple stitch, you do not need to chain. You only chain before the return pass. So I'm going to go underneath the vertical bar, just like that. I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to pull up a loop. So I did not go underneath this vertical bar because this loop was already on the hook. Okay. Underneath the next one, and pull up a loop. Here's my next one. Pull up a loop. And when we're all done, I'm hoping I still have 10. Over, pull up a loop. So this is the first half of row 2. Next bar. Here's the next bar. Here's the next bar. And I should have 9. Let's double check. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The last stitch, the last Tunisian stitch is, I'm going to push this out of the way. When we did our return pass before, we made a chain 1. And when we made that chain 1, it kind of pulled up the stitch from the last row. It's right on the end there. You turn it a little bit to the side. I'm going to go underneath both loops. And that's my last bar, or my last Tunisian stitch to pull up. That's how you're going to have straight sides. If you don't go in there, you will not have straight sides. I'm going to demonstrate this a couple more times. That's the first half of row 2. Second half of row 2 is the return pass, which always starts with a chain 1. So I yarned over, just pull through 1 loop, chain 1. So now, when we come back, go across and come back, Here's the chain one, and right beneath it is the last stitch, is where we'll make our last stitch on the next one. Some people will put a little stitch marker there, because now is when it's easy to see, when you've just created it. So it's right beneath your chain one. The alternative, if you really have a hard time, is you can just go into the chain one, as long as you're consistent. I'm gonna put a little stitch marker there, so I won't be hunting for where my last stitch goes. So now I've done my chain one. Now it's yarn over, pull through two, all the way across. Make sure you are pulling through two. This is how your stitch count gets off. When I yarn over, I'm adding a stitch. When I pull through two, I'm taking one away. So my net result is 0. If you were to yarn over and only pull through one, you would be adding a stitch. If I were to, if I were to yarn over and accidentally pull through 3, I would be losing a stitch, okay? So we want our net result to be 0. Pass through 2. If you're not sure if you've actually pulled through 2, you can see right here, the loop that's on my hook, I've got 2 loops crossing over it. So I know I've pulled through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Repeat until you don't have any left. So now that first row we did has been filled in because we went underneath the bars. And now the row that we just completed looks a little open and loose because we need to go in and fill those bars. So I'm going to do another one. I recommend, before we go too much further, when you're making a swatch, 2 or 3 inches is probably okay. Don't let Hager Beth here make her, don't tell them I said that. I do feel like in crochet, you don't need to do as much work to measure. I feel like 2 or 3 inches is probably enough. Crochet stitches and Tunisian crochet stitches attach themselves a little bit differently than knitted stitches. They're not completely dependent on the stitches below them. If I were to drop a stitch off, it's not all going to come unraveled the way it does in knitting. So I don't feel like your gauge swatch needs to be huge, but it does need to be enough that you've had a chance to even out your tension a little bit. First rows are always sloppy. Now I'm going to go underneath my vertical bars and pick up stitches. First rows tend to be sloppy, so you want to get away and kind of find your rhythm a little bit to really find your gauge. If after, maybe 4 rows, should have 9, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Here's my last, and because I marked it, I don't have to hunt for it. Go right in there, pull up my loop, and I'll have 10 stitches, and I will have straight sides. If you are chain 1 and do your return pass, if you already are doing something and it feels really, really tight after a couple of rows, go ahead and try a different hook size. Because if you don't like the fabric that you're making, it doesn't matter if it's on gauge or not. If you don't like it, you're not going to make it. You're not going to be happy with your end result. If it seems really too loose after maybe 3 or 4 complete rows, try and going down a hook size and see. So this happens to be a 6.5 millimeter hook, which is a 0.5 millimeter bigger than the size I'm actually doing, but this is the one I have handy without a cord attached, and it is too loose for my preference. So the one that I picked makes a, let's do them side by side here. Even after 2 or now 3 complete rows, I can already tell this is a nicer fabric for what I like, right? It doesn't mean this is wrong, it's preference at this point. I like the way this looked, I like it was still squishy. It wasn't too firm. It had a little bit of see-through, but not like that one, okay? All right, I'm gonna do one more and then I'm gonna show you how to check your gauge. So this is all the Tunisian stitch, simple stitches, is going underneath the vertical bars, going up a loop, don't skip any. Double check your stitch count for the first few rows until you're feeling a little more confident. Making that last Tunisian stitch and doing a return pass. That is 99% of our chain one return of our cardigan. Just like in regular crochet, the main difference in different Tunisian stitches, and there are a lot of them, is where you insert the hook and how you yarn over to make all the difference. Okay, I'm going to do just one more. I said one more and then I changed it. So if you're using the right hook and a nice and a comfortable yarn, you'll find that this actually goes pretty quick. Last stitch. And over, pull through one for my chain one. I should have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Perfect. Still have my same number of stitches. And then let me show you how to count gauge. When you are ready to count your stitches or rows, you must have completed a return pass. A row is not complete unless the return pass is done. It takes putting the stitches on the hook and taking them off to complete one row, right? So let's check a little gauge here. So let's measure stitches first. Like that. So I like to measure things in 2-inch increments. So I'm going to put my 0 mark at the outside edge here of one of the vertical bars. And then I'm going to count how many vertical bars until I get to the 2. Okay. Put this down just a little bit. All right, so I've got it at the edge of this one right here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just about 6, just a hair shy of 6. And then I try that in a different location, which is why if I did it on a bigger, but you have a couple more, if you do 20 stitches, you have more places to test it. So now let's test it down here. Start with it. So right up here at this edge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the same thing I got the last time. So I'm getting 6 stitches in 2 inches, which means I'm getting 3 stitches per inch. And our gauge wants us to have 3.75. If you took the 15 stitches and divided it by 4 inches, it's 3.75. So I need more stitches. I'm only getting 3. I need closer to 4 stitches in an inch. And in order to get more stitches in that inch, my stitches need to be smaller. Okay, so if I went down a hook size, let's measure this one, which is I think what I ended up on. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 7. in that 2 inches. This was 1 hook size different. It's 3.5-ish, which is much closer than the 3 to my 375. And I was happy with this fabric. Okay. It also allowed me to pick a size on our, I can show you that part because that's not completely. So I started here because I wanted the ease around for my hips, but then I'm going to work back to here, which is closer to my bust measurement. So I'm going to start here and I'll do some decreasing along the way to get closer to here, which is roughly about 2-ish inches or so around my bust. So it's going to fit nicely. I want to be able to wear it over something. So I wanted to have that full 2 inches, if not a hair bit more. So find the size that is closest with the amount of ease that for your gauge. If you're not getting, and you like your fabric and you're not getting gauge, let's say you really liked this 3 stitches per inch, then there is math we can do. We can figure out, all right, if you're getting 3 stitches per inch and you need it to be 50 inches, here's how many you need to cast on. We can do the math. We can make it fit where you want it to fit, okay? And we're happy to do that with you anytime. And it's actually easy enough to do over the phone if you're not local, or via Zoom if you can't come in, okay? So that's how you count your stitches. Here's how you count your rows. Your rows, remember, you have to take, in order to make that vertical bar, you have to put the stitches on and take them off, all right? So you can count your vertical bars, actually goes this way, sorry. You can count your vertical bars to count your rows. So here's 1 row, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 7 rows, not counting this top one. And let's see what that measures to be. And we'll check our row gauge. Because of the construction of this, so that's about 2 inches. So that's, she wanted 13 rows. I'm getting 14 rows, approximately for 2 inches instead of the 13, which isn't bad. Because this is constructed from the bottom up, if we want it longer or shorter, we can reduce or add the number of rows that we add. If you were making something and you were working it sideways, then your row gauge would matter quite a bit, because you're going to need to make it a certain, especially if there's something going on in there, you need to adjust for increases or decreases. But when you're going from top to bottom, adding, building rows, and that's the direction of the construction, you can just reduce or add the number of rows to make it work for you. So if your row gauge is a little off, don't worry about that. She has you working in measurements for the most part. So you can, you're going to work until something is a certain number of inches long, and you're just going to keep making those rows until it measures that amount. Okay. So don't let that throw you. Is there any questions about gauge? Okay. If you've got specific questions, like I said, please don't hesitate to ask us because we love to talk gauge around here. All right. So we've talked about how to count your rows. We did the Tunisian stitch. We did the turn pass. Let's work on the honeycomb pattern. I'm going to continue working on, and I recommend working on your gauge swatch. Just switch to you can switch to the honeycomb pattern right from here, okay? So since I have 10 stitches, I'm going to follow the honeycomb pattern for the even number of stitches. Okay. So already my little swatch is starting to roll. Okay. Here's how the honeycomb pattern works. You are going to do, row 1 says TSS, Tunisian simple stitch, 1 stitch, and then Tunisian purl stitch, TPS, 1 stitch. And those are in parentheses. You do that across the row. So here's how that works. We're going to start with our regular simple stitch. Go underneath the first available bar and pull up a loop. Tunisian purl stitch. We're going to bring that yarn forward first. Then we're going to pick up the bar. And then we're going to take the yarn to the back before we yarn over. We're not going to bring it over the hook. Big no-no. Bring it around and pull up a loop. And you'll see it puts a little bump on the top of that, or I'm sorry, on the bottom of that bar. So here was a simple stitch. Here was the one we started with, which is always going to be like this. Always going to be a simple stitch. Then we made a simple stitch and a purl stitch. And we make a simple stitch again. And then we make a purl stitch. Bring the yarn forward, pick up the bar, take the yarn to the back, yarn over, pull through. And I have found after doing this quite a bit that I get the yarn, the hook to do the work. So let me do my next simple stitch. And then I bring the hook behind the yarn and force it forward. Pick up my bar, take it to the back, pull it through. Simple stitch, purl stitch. And you should finish with a purl stitch. So I should have all but my last stitch left. I should have 9. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Hallelujah. So then you make your last stitch the same way you've been making it already. Go into the end, pull up a loop. Your return pass is exactly the same. Chain 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. All right, so this is a good place to show you. Before I start the second row, which is different than the first row of the honeycomb pattern, because you're going to have a lot of stitches when you're doing it, if you want to make sure, you want to count, when you don't have all those loops on your hook, here's how you count your stitches, okay? Zoom in just a little. All right, so the first stitch is right here where my loop is coming out. I do want to count that because it counts as one of our stitches. That loop on the hook counts. So there's 1. I'm counting my vertical bars. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the last 10. Okay, so you can count your vertical bars, and then you can see, zoom in just a little more. This was the first one we made, which was a simple stitch. And here is the Tunisian purl, which has this little bump where we brought the yarn in front of the bar. And then we have the regular bar, Tunisian simple stitch, and then there's the little bump for the purl. Simple stitch, bump for the purl. Simple stitch, bump for the purl. And then our last stitch is like this, just a regular simple stitch. Now, remember I told you about keeping it from rolling has to do with getting that balance. So this time we're going to start with the purl stitch. So yarn forward first. Make your purl stitch first, and then make your simple stitch. So you're doing the simple stitch on top of a purl bar and your purl stitch on top of a regular bar. And that's how you get that balance. If you put this down in the middle and like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Did I just do a purl? Did I just do, I don't know what I've just done. I'll show you how to recognize your stitches. So there's the little bump for the purl. There's no bump on this bar, which means it was a simple stitch. Here's the little bump on the purl. Next one is a simple stitch. No bump. Bring the yarn forward. Put the next bar. The yarn to the back. Pull it through. I find myself saying purl knit as I do this. Because it is very much like doing ribbing in knitting, where you're alternating your simple stitches or your knits. So this one's going to end with a simple stitch, and then your last Tunisian stitch. Chain one, and over, pull through two, 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 and two. Okay. So I'm just going to turn it sideways. It's already, this side where we started is still really curling. This is already starting to straighten out because the tension between simple stitches and purl stitches is evening it out. So repeating those 2 rows is how you get your honeycomb pattern. And you're going to repeat it for your band for rows 2 through 7. Remembering that you have not completed a row until you've worked across and worked back. Okay, so I have now done 2 complete rows. So now I'm about to start my 3rd row, which starts with the simple stitch, go back to row 1, and then purl. And simple. This looks, it's a little bit hard to see the pattern. I'm going to pull over my actual one because this is so loose. Simple. Purl. Simple. This one should end with a purl. And then your last stitch. Chain 1. Go through 2. And then go through 2. And go through 2. 2. 2. 2 and 2. That was row 3. And I'm going to do one more of row 4, and maybe you can start to see the little honeycomb pattern. So this one will start with a purl. Simple. 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 And then my little stitch. Chain 1. Yeah, over through 2. You're going to do this rows 2 through 7, which is a total of 6 rows. So you can start to see it makes this little honeycomb pattern. This. And if you look at it from the side, look how straight that is. And this side is still really curling. So that really, it evens out the tension and allows it to lay flat. So let me show you the bottom here. Mine, I think you can see because it's a little tighter gauge, you can start to see the honeycomb pattern. So it's just kind of it alternates the knits, the simple stitches and the purls. Let me turn it this way. This is the way you start. So you get this nice edging that looks a little textured, and then you work into your simple stitch and work your way up. It hides a multitude of errors. I've seen a couple of them that I've made, but honestly, if you can't see them, no one else is going to see them. Like I said, I did a little bit of decreasing across, and if that's something you feel like you need to do to make it fit your body, I'm happy to work with you on how to do that. I don't want to throw too much information at you the first one, and I'm happy to do that privately, and there's never any charge for that. We'll get you going on that. Like somewhere along here I did something wrong, but it's all good. Are there any questions about either the simple stitch or the honeycomb stitch? So compliant. Love it. So here's where we want to end up next month. If you can get the back done, that would be great. If you're coming in person or can come in person sometime between now and the next one, if you need help deciding if it's long enough or wide enough, or needs to be wider, needs to come, bring it in, and let's do that. But I'd like to start coming. I'd like to make sure you can see how it's going to come over your shoulder. So next month, we're going to work on, you can go ahead and work on this part too. It's just doing this simple stitch, but I'm going to show you how to finish into the honeycomb pattern. And then I'm going to also show you how to pick up these stitches that we left unworked and how to pick up the left. And then I'm also going to show you how to make the sleeves. Even if you haven't finished the other pieces, the great thing about crochet is you can take the hook out, get another ball of yarn, and make your sleeves. So if you're tired with kind of the monotony of this and want a little break, or don't want to finish the whole thing and then have to go back and do the sleeves, we call that sleeve island. People hang out on sleeve island for a very long time without finishing their project, because the most work you have to do is on the body. Some people will make their sleeves first so that when they get through all of that work they did on the body, their sleeves are already done, and then they can put it together and then it's finished, which is a really great feeling. So I'm going to show you next month how to make the sleeves and how to pick up the stitches for the collar. Even if you haven't gotten to that part, don't worry about it, because you can always go back and watch the video, but I'm going to show you how to do that. And there are some increases that we're going to do on the sleeve, so I'll show you how to do that. And then the last session, I'm going to show you how to do the pockets, if you choose to have pockets, how to block it, and how to seam it. And that's how we'll finish out. So that is our Tunisian crochet cardigan. So our next session is September 30th, and our third session is October 28th. Perfect time to have a fall cardigan ready. Anybody have any questions?
Nope.
Looking good. Looks good.
Looks good. Yep.
Awesome. This has been really fun. It's a really great pattern, and I think everybody's really going to enjoy it. I'm just going to stop recording here.